I can tell you about two different kinds of starts I have. I have my days where I get out of bed, and one of the very first things I do is movement and intentionality. So my movement, I get on the yoga mat, or I take a walk, or I get on my bike. I do a little bit of movement, and I'm not talking a ton here because I got to get dressed and get out the door for work. So maybe 20 minutes, a little bit goes a long way, as one of my favorite yoga teachers likes to say. And then the intentionality piece is, rather than just jumping into the to-do list for the day, I try to step back and ask myself, what are the priorities for the day, both in terms of the activity, but also in terms of how I show up in the world today. Do I need to be particularly encouraging in some relationships? Do I need to be strong and ethical to my core because of certain conversations that might be happening in my day? What are my big goals for the day? If I start with movement and intention, my days inevitably seem to be more productive and more satisfying to me. I see more of my potential coming out. Now, don't let me kid you. Not every day starts that way. I do have those days when, instead of getting up and starting with movement and starting with intentionality, I get up and maybe the very first thing I do is open the email, and then I'm down that rabbit hole of trying to clear the email out first thing in the morning, which gets me very scattered, because email, one thing's about this project and another's about that, and some emails are important and some aren't. And yet here I've given the best time of day for me, my strongest energy, to these things that are maybe not even all that important. And that reminded me of that Eisenhower matrix that a lot of you've probably seen. We've got a slide for this that we can show you. This was popularized by Stephen Covey and his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But it was that idea that some days, or some of our activities, are both really urgent and really important. The pressing problems, the deadline driven projects. Other things are urgent. They keep popping in, they keep being in your face, but they're not actually all that important. And then we have those not urgent or important things. That's some of the email that I'm following, some calls, I'm not going to say that all pleasant activities aren't important, because certainly some of them are, but when it's time killing kinds of things that we sometimes engage in, that's not important, not urgent. And then that not urgent, it's not a crisis, it's not an emergency, but this is important stuff. Our personal growth, our relationship building, our planning activities, that's where we want to spend the most time that we can, because then we don't have as many of those urgent things, because we've planned and we've prepared, and we're spending our time on the things that are really important. So that is one of the ways to think about our day. Now, Scott Mouts is one of our guests from this past year. Scott's the author of 3 or 4 books. One of his most recent and bestsellers is Leading from the Middle. And Scott, when he was with us, talked about a few things that we can do to start our day off really well. So again, if you're commenting, you're telling us where you're from and what your morning routine or your favorite affirmation, because Scott will introduce us to that idea, into the chat while we listen to Scott.
To start the day with, remembering three things: goals, affirmations, and sparks that you can add. Wake up in the morning, remember, what are my micro goals for the day? What are my macro goals? The big thing, the 1 or 2 big things I'm trying to accomplish, what are the small steps I can take to get there? Just to organize your mind and to not get sucked into a world of emails that might just be thrown at you right from the get-go, right? Simple affirmations. They really, really work as long as they're specific. Waking up in the morning and saying, looking in the mirror and say, I can do anything, isn't helpful. It's not specific. It's not addressing any particular problem. When you wake up in the morning, if you've been kind of struggling with just having a bad attitude every once in a while, saying something like, life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it, that's a different affirmation. I use that one all the time. Very specific, going after a certain thing that's important to you.
So I see Brendan and Jay have both given us some ideas of what their best morning routine looks like, that one that awakens the true potential. Brendan talks about cold shower and being grateful. Brendan, I just read a book called Dopamine Nation, and they talk about needing that balance of pain in our lives to make us more grateful for the rest of our lives, perhaps. And cold therapy was a lot of what they talked about in that book. So interesting that you bring that up. Sounds like you may have been doing some similar reading. And then Jay starts with his personal growth first thing in the morning. He's working on his Polish, English, and language skills using the Duolingo app, and then gets that walk inside the room. Both give you a lot of energy and a great way to start the day. So I love it. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Brendan, for helping us understand what a great day looks like for you and how we can get it started. You may have noticed Scott also mentioned Sparks along with his other 2 tips for us. Sparks is that idea of planning into your day moments when you're going to be intentional about positivity. So, with that idea that Brendan starts the day with gratitude, I try to remind myself that each time I have a cup of tea, I'm a big hot tea drinker. And as I put my tea bag into the cup of tea and I wait for it to steep before drinking it, that's my moment to go, hey, what's been happening today that I can be grateful for? And that gratitude practice then brings positivity into the entire day. So we're starting our day off great. We've got our routines. We've got the different ways that we shape our day for great potential, for unleashing or awakening our potential. The next piece, though, is making sure that we're on a personal growth track if we're really going to expand our potential. So I love it, Jay, that you're starting with learning first thing in the morning. When we think about how can we improve ourselves, how can we reach our potential, how can we be on a learning path all the time, I think it's so important to remember to get feedback from others on areas where we are strong and where we have opportunities to grow. So certainly a lot of that reflection comes from internally. We need to be self-assessing our strengths and weaknesses. But that assessment is so much richer and more robust if we've also tapped people external to ourselves to ask them what they're seeing in us. One of the tools I love to use to give and to get feedback is the SBI, Situation, Behavior, Impact Feedback Model. And so if I'm asking for feedback, instead of just saying, hey, how do you think I did on that last speech, for example, or how did my last Learn Plus show go? I can get a little more specific about what was the situation, what were the behaviors I was interested in, and then asking what impact it had. So maybe for situation, you could say to a colleague, hey, in that email that I wrote yesterday, or in that report that we finished, or in the meeting that I led. So you're giving them the situation, then give them the behaviors. I would love your feedback on how and then be specific. Did the tone in the email come across the way I wanted it to? I'm curious about your impressions of how well I brought in diverse voices into the meeting that I was leading. So ask about specific behaviors that you're interested in, and then ask about the impact and what impact did that have on people? By using SBI to solicit feedback, we're more likely to get good feedback from people.